sambuddhassa buddhang dhammang sanghang gunuttarang upachayang namasami. Okay. Well, as you may have guessed, I realized earlier this week that today was Independence Day. And oftentimes in our tradition, we try to come to a talk or come to a gathering without really planning the talk too much. But this theme of dependence and independence has really been kind of following me through my meditations for the week. And I think it's a really fascinating thread to thread into, to tap into, to think about, to feel. So I did, as I am wont to do, I did start thinking about the different Pali words for independence, and that was fun, the Pali words for dependence. But not long after, I thought of my senior year in high school. And this might be a reference which the vast majority of you will not understand at all. But in my senior year in high school, it was the year 2000. The year 2000. And on the Billboard Top 100 was a song by Beyonce and Destiny's Child, Independent Women. Anybody? For all my women who are independent, throw your hands up at me. And if you're at the club, you throw your hands up. And the song was so good that even though I was not a woman, I was just a young dancing boy at the time, and I was not independent. The shoes on my feet, I didn't buy them. The clothes I was wearing, I didn't buy them. The house I lived in, I didn't buy it. The car I drove, I didn't buy it. Those are words from the song. Except Beyonce actually bought all those things. But I was not independent, and I was not a woman, but still the song was so good that I just could not help dancing to it. Even if I raised my hands and people called me out like, you're not a woman, you're not independent. But still, so I thought, okay, could I have an anthem, bring a new anthem into the Buddhist world? To all my Buddhists who independent, throw your hands up at me like this. And before you do it, I realized that actually in Buddhism, it's not that simple. It's not that simple of a thing that we're either dependent or we're independent. There are many things the Buddha encouraged us to be realistic as we look at our minds, look at our attachments, look at our relationships. There are ways that we have healthy and necessary dependencies. In our chanting book, I'm not sure exactly which page, but there's a chant on the four requisites, and the Pali term for that is the four nissaya. So this can also be translated as dependencies, the four dependencies. And we memorize this chant in Pali and English, that wisely reflecting every day, I use the robe, not only to ward off cold, to ward off heat, to ward off flies, mosquitoes, wind, burning, and creeping things. Wisely reflecting, I use alms food only for the maintenance and nourishment of my body, for keeping it healthy, for helping with the holy life. Wisely reflecting, I use the lodging only to ward off cold, to ward off heat, only for the sake of seclusion, and so too with medicines. So these are necessary supports, necessary dependencies. If you're a human with a human body, even if you are an arahant, even if you're an enlightened person, still they live in the world, and there's this relationship, this interdependency. So that's a type of dependency, this nissaya or nissita, or in other words, paccaya, or conditions. We are necessarily conditioned. So the Buddha had us reflect on that specifically. To what am I dependent? To what do I rely on? As junior monastics, whether monks or nuns, our first 5 years in robes is also called nissaya. We are independent on our teachers. This is a period of time when it's kind of like a apprenticeship period before our 6th year in robes, when we kind of become journeymen, journeywomen, journey people, where we're basically learning the ins and outs of what it means to live a monastic life, this ascetic life, how to wear the robes, how to be simple, how to be content, how to have few wishes. How do we actually do that? So this period of necessary dependency. So too with all of us, humans have one of the longest periods of specific dependency on our parents. We can't look after ourselves. If our parents were to just have let us go on day one, we wouldn't have survived. We have to be looked after by our parents. Similarly, when we're learning about this holy life, the Buddha said that spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life. This dependency period is really important, certainly for a monastic life, but really for any kind of serious spiritual life, having friends, having mirrors who can show us our blind spots. Because if we didn't have any blind spots, then it would just be totally smooth sailing. We would all just either already be enlightened or just totally on the smooth course towards enlightenment. But we depend on our teachers, on the people around us, our wise spiritual companions, our wise friends. So these are types of dependencies, and being realistic about that. What are my necessary dependencies? What are your necessary dependencies, and what are your unnecessary dependencies? What are you unnecessarily dependent on? And this can be, the framing in English of dependency, of addiction, the language of addiction and obsession and compulsion. This is really at the heart of the Dhamma. This is at the heart of the Four Noble Truths. We're trying to figure out this addiction to the world around us, to the relationships that we entangle ourselves in, our addiction to unhealthy things and substances, and how do we have healthier relationships to the things upon which we are dependent, and how do we give up this unnecessary clinging to things which we really don't need? Those 4 nissaya, those 4 paccaya of robes or clothing, of food, of shelter, of medicine. How much do you really need? How much do we really need? And how much is superfluous? Or how much might we actually thrive if we were able to give up? The Buddha talks about the joy of renunciation. And it's not just a monk thing, not just a nun thing. You don't have to wait till you put on these robes to start realizing how fun it can be to just give up all your old junk that you don't need, all the things which are actually just a weight, a burden. So asking ourselves, upon what am I unnecessarily dependent? So that kind of dependency, nissaya, paccaya, anissita. But the Buddha also talked about interdependence. So one of the main principles of Buddhism is dependent origination, this principle of causality. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this ceases, that ceases. When there's not this, there's not that. Basically, that in its essence is the fundamental of causality in Buddhism. And there's a lot of interdependence there. We rely on one another. The Buddha in the Theravāda Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 30 or 31, the Buddha talks about not different rights that we have because we are children or because we're students or because we're Americans or because we're whatever, but he talks about interdependent relationships, different responsibilities. He talks about the responsibility, the interrelationship, the interdependence between child and parent, between student and teacher, from teacher to student, from friend to friend, from spouse to spouse, going both ways, from employer to employee, from employee to employer. It's a set of mutually reciprocal responsibilities, this interdependence. One of the chants we do, it's in here in our chanting book, is the 10 subjects for frequent recollection by one who's gone forth. And that specifically, that term going forth, one who's gone forth, is, in one sense, that's a euphemism for a monastic, but it's really pointing to someone who's wanting to go forth into freedom, going forth from bondage, from unnecessary attachment to a greater sense of freedom. And I believe it's the second of those 10 reflections, is that my very life is the gift of others. My very life is a gift of others. And this is so true for monastics, every calorie we eat, but it's also so and completely true for all of you as well. Our very lives are maintained by the gifts of others. All the hands that went into getting the food on your plate, all of the work that went into the building materials that built our houses, the places where we stay. Not to mention all of the goodwill that went into all of the relationships which nurture not just our physical selves, but our emotional selves, our relational selves. Our very lives are sustained through the gifts of others, this interdependence. And why I didn't want you all to immediately raise your hands in Anjali when I asked which Buddhists are independent is because the independent one who is truly independent, is another name for an arahant, someone who is actually fully enlightened. It's really only when we become fully enlightened that we reach a true place of independence. Stream entry, the first taste of enlightenment, one is said to be apara paccaya. One is no longer conditioned or dependent on someone else for the teachings. You've gained a foothold in the Dhamma. You can be your own teacher. Until we reach stream entry, we're very dependent for instruction and correction and feedback and all of the mirroring that happens in a healthy relationship upon others. It's just at stream entry when we become independent of others. And it's only at arahantship where we achieve this state of anissita. So anissita, nissaya, the root of that is to lie down or to sit down. Ni means down, and si is the root meaning to sit, to rest. You're no longer leaning on anybody else. You're no longer leaning for support and for nourishment and for sustenance. You're no longer codependent. You've reached a space of independence in the Dhamma. In the Sutta to Anattapindika, I think it's Majjhima 140, Sariputta is teaching Anattapindika about all the things that we should strive to be independent of, the things we should strive not to be attached to. He says, Anattapindika, you should strive not to be attached to have a state of independence from the I and from forms and from eye contact and the feeling that arises from eye contact. So too with the ears and sounds and the nose and smells, tongue, tastes, body, touch, mind, mental objects. Freedom from attachment to this world, attachment to the next world. Freedom from attachment to earth. Freedom from attachment and grasping after air, liquidity, heat. Total independence. That's the state of an arahant. And after this teaching, this on utter non-clinging, total freedom, true independence, Anattapindika, a layperson, one of the Buddha's foremost lay disciples, he starts crying and he says, why have I never heard this before? Why have you never taught us this before? There are lay people who can hear this teaching. Why have you not taught it? And Sariputta says, well, I just didn't know if you could hear it. I just didn't know. It's a profound teaching on independence, and not everybody wants to hear that, is prepared to hear that. So Anathapindika passes away and is born in a Brahma world. So that's true independence. So there's a list of 10 topics of conversation. There's another list of 28 topics of conversation that the Buddha said that for monastics, for those of us who have gone forth formally, we're wearing these robes, 28 topics that topics of conversation we should not engage in. Talks about kings and ministers and battles and dangers and food and drink. I know I mentioned those burritos, but as a passing comment about jewelry and about scents and about men and women and about heroes and talk of the street and talk of the well, 28 subjects. He mentions this again and again that we shouldn't engage in. We shouldn't engage in, which is basically all of YouTube. That's most of all of your algorithm on YouTube and Instagram and Snapchat, if that's still a thing. All of our feeds really are what we feed on. And it is all of these things. But the Buddha gave this other great list of 10 topics for conversation, which he said that if you engage in these 10 topics, you will outshine the moon. You will outshine the sun. What are those? They are talk on contentment, talk on fewness of wishes, talk on seclusion, talk on unentanglement, talk on putting forth energy, talk on morality, talk on concentration or meditation, talk on insight. This is the one that I'm reading. The whole list is for this number 9. Talk on independence, talk on freedom, talk on vimutti, and talk on knowledge and vision of vimutti, of independence. So talking about freedom. Today is Independence Day. What does that actually mean? And so the Buddha encouraged us not just for monastics. It's in the Sutta on highest blessings. The Buddha says that listening to Dhamma at suitable times is one of the highest blessings. But he also said engaging in talk on the Dhamma, especially this talk on freedom, is one of life's highest blessings. So, with that in mind, I would love to actually turn it over to all of you. And we've gotten some feedback, and it's definitely true that, just listening to a sermon or just receiving all the time, it's not necessarily the best way always to learn. It is the format which we find in our Buddhist circles, many of which we ordained in or are familiar with, but also talking to one another. So what I'm going to suggest now is that all of you split up, just let me finish the instructions, split up into triplets. And Mary Webster will do this on Zoom. Already talked to Mary, but just turning to maybe 2 people around you, so forming triplets. And if you're just a group of 1 or a group of 2, raise your hand, and then you can find each other. And if there's anybody odd people out, you can come up and have a conversation with me. But we'll spend time, each of those triplets. So we'll spend time, each person will get 3 to 4 minutes. Let's do 4 minutes apiece, answering these 2 questions. The first question is, and at least every third person, try to memorize this list of 2 questions. Okay? So the first question is, realistically, what specifically am I unnecessarily dependent upon? Specifically, your phone, your codependent relationship, whatever. What specifically am I unnecessarily dependent on? And the second question is, what experiences have I felt of relative independence, specifically independent sense of well-being? What specific experience, what flavor of an independent well-being have I experienced in my life? Whether it was a peak experience you had 20 years ago or an experience you had this morning or during the meditation, whatever it is. So those are the 2 questions. Unnecessary dependencies and real-life flavors, tastes of independent well-being. And so with that, would suggest everybody find 2 people around you, and then I will ring a bell, and the 2 people who are not speaking, figure out who will speak first, and then the 2 other people, you can take it as a time of meditation, just continuing your listening. And then I'll ring a bell in 4 minutes, and we can switch, and then the next person shares, and then the others 2 listen, and then I'll ring a bell again, and we can come back together. So find your triplets, find 2 others. There is an independence that's talked of in the canon. So one doesn't have to wait until arahantship, but in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Sutta on mindfulness, the frames or foundations of mindfulness, it comes up somewhere between 18 and 22 times, is that one abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Anissito cha viharati na cha kinchi loke upadiyati. So is it possible to tap into a flavor of that just in this moment? So independent, not clinging to anything in the world. And just holding that, would love to just open it up to the whole room, if anybody would care to share. If there were questions, that could happen as well, but also just sharing anything unexpected that came up in your sharing, or anything that you'd like to, right here. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you so much for these teachings this morning. My voice is different. So when you just quoted the Satipatthana Sutta, that helped bring clarification, because independence, that whole phrase, and not clinging, and then I also internally heard not averse, almost like this checking, so that this independence is an interdependence of this checking, not this. It's a very curious, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Ajahn. There was some discussion in our small group about the experience of a letting go of seeking outside ourselves for affirmation, or looking to others for affirmation, or to feel okay about ourselves, or something sort of that flavor. And wow, there's so much freedom in that experience, when there's just an okayness in here and not looking to someone else for that. And so just thinking about little moments of that, and hopefully that they add up to more and longer time in that space. It's a hard one, but so much freedom.
Thank you for this exercise. It was nice to sit with it with other people. What I've always subscribed to the idea that just practicing is making an impact in the world, for yourself, is making an impact outside. But I never really knew how. And then in having this conversation, I connected the dots that when you surround yourself by people who you know are focused on not clinging to ideas, then it's much easier for you to catch yourself clinging to a thought of what they may think of you, and realizing how silly it is, because you know that it's likely they don't think anything of you, because that's not the game they're playing. You know, we're all human, but so just if I knew that Seattle was 20% more Buddhist, for example, or my company I worked at was 20% more Buddhist, that would, in theory, I would think give me 20% more access. And the idea is to have that access in an environment where you do feel you're going to be judged, right? It's supposed to be across the board, but having any access to that is really powerful. So now I see what the value is of just practicing. Thank you.
Just keep passing it this way. So this didn't directly come up in our group, though it was very rich conversation. But I was just now reflecting on the interview you had with Kaira Jewel Lingo and the moments of independence that can come from sila. And that was so apparent in that interview. So it's still really resonating with me, and if you haven't heard it, it's worth it. So.
Hi. So my unnecessary somewhat addiction is cooking, but I am very worried if I give this up, what would happen to my relationships and friends and all that stuff. If I go to cook one, I would make two. So whatever I make, I try to make it better and all kinds of things. And I think about this all the time. But there was a moment in my life that I felt that this is unnecessary, and I had the opportunity to practice the restraint and then see the results, because I had my shoulder injury, a big injury, so I was not able to cook. So everything was fine. So that it made me realize that it was fine, except the fact that so many of my friends ended up giving me so much food. So that was another issue. But I thought it was somewhat necessary, but I think when something is necessary and becomes somewhat unhealthy, I guess we should have the wisdom to know where exactly is to stop. Thank you.
Yeah, Buddhism, that chant that we did, the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts, really a lot of Buddhism is about choosing our dependencies wisely and choosing less harmful, less sticky, less kind of things without as much of a aftertaste or after effect. So the 3 refuges, you're taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. You're leaning on that, the principles of wakefulness and truth and loving kindness. And similarly with the precepts, that word samadhiyami, I undertake the precepts samadhiyami. That's the same. It's the opposite. It's the same root, ada, which means to hold, to take up. Upadana is clinging. It's the unhealthy clinging, which will always lead to dukkha, independent origination. But samadhana, undertaking, is the healthy form of holding on to something. We need to hold on to the next rung before we can get to the next one. So healthy holding, healthy dependencies, creating some choice, greater choice of what we lean on. So, yeah, thank you.
You may think this is unfair. Can you hear me? Okay, but I'm going to give this to you because I'd like you to mention the ITA organization, because I think that's a big addiction.
Sure. So yeah, there is a 12-step fellowship called ITAA, Internet and Technology Addicts Anonymous, where people do choose to abstain from addictive internet and technology use. And I'm a part of that, and I find it very helpful. But it is a personal decision to choose to follow that path. But yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
My question is, where does honesty, and if you have to choose honesty and being kind, which decision to make? Like yesterday, somebody was crying, day before yesterday, and I talked to her. She came back and she wanted to talk more. I listened to her, but then I realized I couldn't do my meditation. With this discussion this morning, I realized, I could have been honest and told her. But on the other hand, what if she needed my time? And so I'm still kind of thinking about it. What is the best thing I could have done? Or maybe it was past, let it go, but how to move forward?
Yeah, very good question. The Buddha gives this fascinating, almost tree diagram of questions, filters for the front of our mouth. So before you're going to let something out of your mouth, the first thing you should ask is this true? Okay? And if it's not true, it's shooting out of the mouth this way. If it's not true, you just don't say it. If it's true, the next filter that you ask over here is it beneficial? If it's not beneficial, you don't say it. But if it is beneficial, the third and final filter is you ask yourself, when is the right time to say this? So if it's true and it's beneficial, but it might actually hurt the other person's feelings, then you need to choose the right time to say it. If it is really going to be, it might be hard. The simile that the Buddha gives for this is like a king. He was speaking to a king, Abhaya Rajakumara, who had a baby on his lap, and he asked the king, what would you do if your baby swallowed a tack? Would you crook your finger in and actually pull it out, even if it was to draw blood? And the king or the prince said that he would. And so too, if sometimes there might be things which we need to say which won't be pleasing to the ear, and in which case we choose the right time and place to say it. So all of those take wisdom and discernment, but yeah, we don't want to hurt anybody. We don't want to just blurt something out because it's true. Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think we have time for maybe one more sharing from.
This is about dependence and independence combined. Does anybody here have a cell phone? And cell phones often give us a sense of being very independent. I can get anything, I can find anything, I can go anywhere because I can do it on my cell phone. Now, lose your cell phone. You'll get a sense of dependence right away. And you'll get all kinds of really deep feelings. You'll have panic, you'll have, think about that, and why are you so attached to that cell phone?
Thank you. Okay, well, that was enjoyable. I got to participate in one of the 3-person conversations, and I think we'll do that again. That seemed really like a nice way to allow people to interact with others who you might not have met yet.